Get out of here. We don't want your kind around here." The manager's voice boomed across the shiny car dealership floor, echoing against the glass walls. Customers stopped what they were doing, salesmen froze mid-sentence, and the hum of business screeched to a halt. Snoop Dogg stood there, calm, his tall frame draped in casual clothes, not a flashy suit, not a celebrity disguise. Just Snoop being Snoop. The manager didn't recognize him. Or maybe he did, but his mind refused to see past his own prejudice. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, and the arrogance in his voice carried across the room like poison. He pointed at the door, his finger trembling with anger. "You don't belong here. Leave before I call security." Gasps erupted from the staff. A couple of customers whispered, "Wait, is that?" "No way." A few kids clutched their parents' arms, recognizing the legend before them. But the manager didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. His face twisted, full of the ugly confidence of someone who thought they had all the power. Then it happened. Snoop Dogg, the man he just humiliated in front of everyone, slowly reached into his pocket. The room tensed. Security shifted uncomfortably. The air grew heavy. But instead of anger, instead of shouting back, Snoop pulled out a folded document. He held it calmly, his eyes never leaving the manager's. The manager sneered. "What's that supposed to be? A complaint form? You think I care?" Snoop unfolded the papers, smooth and steady, and placed them on the nearest desk. Bold black letters stared back at the manager, letters that made his face go pale. The document read, "Property transfer of ownership." The dealership, the very building he was standing in, the business he thought he ruled over. And the name on the dotted line? Calvin Broadus, Jr. Snoop Dogg's real name. The room fell silent. You could hear the hum of the ceiling lights, the faint tick of the clock, and the shallow breaths of everyone watching. The manager's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between the papers and the man in front of him. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "No, this isn't real." But it was. And Snoop just stared at him, his calm silence louder than any insult he could throw back. The entire dealership was frozen, waiting for what would happen next. And then, it all began just a week earlier. The dealership was known for its shiny cars, its slick-talking salesmen, and its so-called high-class customers. But behind the glass doors, behind the polished smiles, there was a darker side. People whispered about how certain customers were treated differently. Some weren't welcomed at all. Snoop had heard about it too. At first, he brushed it off. He had seen enough of that kind of thing in his life. The sideways looks, the closed doors, the double standards. But when he heard that young black kids in the neighborhood were being humiliated at the dealership, turned away like they didn't belong, something inside him burned. That's when he decided, if they didn't want people like him in there, then he'd make sure people like him owned it. At first, nobody knew. Snoop worked quietly, talking with lawyers, looking over the books, studying the company's debts. And when the chance came, when the old owner wanted out, Snoop moved in and bought the dealership outright. No announcement, no news headlines. He wanted to see the truth for himself, to feel the weight of how they treated people when they thought no one was watching. And now, just 1 week later, he walked in, alone. No entourage, no spotlight, just himself in plain clothes. He wanted to see who they really were. At first, the staff ignored him. Then, when he asked a question about a car, one salesman gave him a cold smile and walked away. Others whispered, laughed quietly, acted as if he didn't deserve to be there. And finally, the manager came storming out, anger dripping from his every step. That was when he screamed the words that set the entire room on fire. And that was when Snoop laid down the papers that silenced the room. But what happened after that silence, what Snoop said, and what the manager did next, would shake the entire dealership to its core. Because this wasn't just about a car lot anymore. This was about respect. This was about power. And this was about what happens when a man who thinks he owns the world suddenly finds out he doesn't. The silence stretched on. Everyone's eyes were locked on Snoop. And then, the manager's face twisted as if the ground had slipped out from under him. His lips trembled, his voice cracked, but his pride pushed him to speak louder than his fear. This is some kind of joke," he shouted, though the paper in front of him said otherwise. You think you can just walk in here with fake papers and... A customer interrupted. A middle-aged man in a suit stepped forward, squinting at the document. I've seen official ownership transfers before. That looks real to me. The murmur spread through the room, like wildfire. People leaned closer, whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones. The staff, who just minutes ago followed the manager's orders with blind obedience, now looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably in their ties and heels. Snoop didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calm stare said more than words ever could. Finally, in that slow, smooth voice everyone in the world recognized, he spoke. I ain't the one who don't belong here. You are. The words hung heavy in the air. The dealership manager's face went red, then pale, then red again. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words stumbled out in broken pieces. You can't, this isn't. But his voice trailed off as Snoop leaned closer, pointing at the paper with his finger, slow and deliberate. You work for me now. Gasps broke out across the room. It felt like a punch in the gut to the manager, who had strutted around the dealership like a king on a throne, his chest puffed out, his tie always straight, his voice always sharp. But in that moment, his throne had crumbled beneath him, and all that was left was silence. For a second, everyone thought he'd back down. But then, out of pride, out of pure desperation to hold onto some kind of control, the manager made a mistake. A big mistake. He stepped forward, his face twisted with rage, and shoved the papers off the desk. They fluttered to the ground like leaves in the wind. Fake, he screamed. This is fake. This is some kind of setup. The room gasped again. Snoop didn't flinch. He bent down, picked up the papers, dusted them off, and placed them back on the desk, as calm as ever. But this time, his eyes locked on the manager's with a sharpness that made even the toughest security guard hesitate. You just made your last mistake in this building. The crowd held their breath. The staff, the customers, even the security guards waiting by the door. Everyone was frozen, caught between disbelief and fear. And then the front doors of the dealership swung open. Two men in sharp black suits walked in, holding briefcases. Lawyers. Snoop's lawyers. They strode across the shiny floor with the confidence of men who knew they were holding the truth. One of them opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and laid them on the desk next to Snoop's papers. Certified, the lawyer said. Signed, sealed, and filed with the county clerk this morning. Effective immediately, Mr. Calvin Broadus Jr. is the sole owner of this dealership. The final nail in the coffin. The staff turned to look at the manager. His mouth opened, then closed, his face crumbling as the truth slammed into him. He looked around, searching for support, but the very people who once stood by him now looked away. And then the lawyer added one more thing. Mr. Broadus has full authority to make staffing changes, effective immediately. The room froze again. Everyone knew what was coming next. The only question was how it would happen. Snoop leaned back slightly, his calm voice cutting through the silence. So tell me, should I let you walk out of here on your own, or should security show you the way? The manager's fists clenched, his pride still burning even as his world collapsed. His chest rose and fell quickly, and for a moment, no one knew what he would do. Would he leave quietly? Would he fight back? The dealership floor felt like it was about to explode. And then, the room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. The manager's fists were trembling at his sides, his jaw clenched so tight, you could almost hear his teeth grinding. Everyone was waiting for his move. Finally, he snapped. I'm not going anywhere, he shouted, slamming his palm against the desk so hard that the papers shook. I built this place. I ran this place. Nobody tells me to leave. The crowd recoiled. Some customers backed up toward the doors. The staff stood frozen, caught between loyalty to their old boss and fear of what would come next. But Snoop didn't move. He leaned back slightly, hands folded in front of him, cool as ice. His voice came out steady and smooth, almost too calm for the storm unfolding in front of him. You done? The question hit harder than the manager's scream. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. But it was final. The manager's face turned red again, his pride pushing him past reason. He turned, pointing at the security guards by the door. "Don't just stand there. Get him out of here. Right now." The guards looked at each other, then back at Snoop, then at the lawyer's documents still spread across the desk. They didn't move. Not one step. "Do your job," the manager barked. One of the guards finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We do work here, sir. But starting today," he nodded toward Snoop, "we work for him." The dealership erupted in whispers. Customers pulled out their phones, recording every second, sensing history in the making. The manager's eyes widened in disbelief. His own guards had turned on him. His face twisted, and then, desperate to save the last shred of authority, he did the unthinkable. He lunged at Snoop. Gasps filled the room. Staff members screamed. The crowd surged back as the manager's arm shot forward, trying to grab Snoop by the collar. But he never made it. In a blur, one of the security guards intercepted him, locking his arms behind his back. Another guard stepped in to block him, forcing him down onto the desk he once ruled from. Papers scattered everywhere as the manager thrashed and shouted, "You can't do this. You can't do this to me." But nobody moved to help him. Not the staff. Not the customers. Not the guards. Snoop stood up slowly, towering over the man pinned to his own desk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words cut sharper than any shout could. "Look around. Ain't nobody here on your side no more." The manager's breathing was ragged. His pride was broken. And for the first time, his eyes showed what he truly felt, fear. Then Snoop turned to the guards. "Take him out." The guards lifted the struggling manager off the desk and dragged him toward the doors. His yells echoed through the dealership, growing fainter as he was pulled outside. The moment the doors shut behind him, the room erupted. Some clapped. Some cheered. Some just shook their heads in disbelief. But everyone knew they had just witnessed the fall of a man who thought he was untouchable. Snoop raised a hand and the room fell silent again. His calm voice carried across the floor. "Now that that's handled, let's get one thing straight. This place ain't gonna run the way it used to. We gon' do things right. We gon' do things fair. And everyone," he looked at the staff, one by one, "gon' be treated with respect." A ripple of relief washed over the employees. For the first time, some of them smiled. But just as the mood began to shift, just as the air felt lighter, the dealership door swung open again. And standing there, breathing hard, was the former manager, this time with 2 police officers at his side. The crowd gasped. The manager's voice was hoarse, but his pride was back. He pointed straight at Snoop. "Arrest him. He's trespassing. He attacked me." The officers stepped forward, hands hovering near their belts. The dealership floor froze once again. And just like that, the storm was back. "Do you want me to keep going with Chapter 4, starting right at the moment when the cops move in on Snoop?" The officer stepped inside, boots echoing against the polished tile. The energy in the dealership shifted instantly. Cheers turned into whispers, whispers into silence. The air grew heavy, thick with fear and anticipation. Snoop stayed calm, standing tall in the center of the room. He didn't flinch, didn't move an inch as the cops' hands hovered near their holsters. The manager, still red in the face and shaking with rage, pointed at him again. "That's him. That's the man who assaulted me. Put him in cuffs now." The officers glanced at each other, unsure. Then one of them, the older one with gray streaks in his hair, cleared his throat. "Sir," he said carefully, "we need to hear both sides before we—" "There are no sides," the manager screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I told you what happened. Do your job, or I'll have you fired too." His voice cracked, a mix of rage and desperation. But instead of making him sound powerful, it only made him sound weak. All eyes turned back to Snoop. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply reached into his jacket pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a folder of documents. The dealership lawyer, still standing off to the side, stepped forward and handed the papers directly to the officers. "Before y'all make a move," Snoop said evenly, "you might want to read this." The younger officer took the papers, flipping through them quickly. His eyes widened as he scanned the pages, the official transfer of ownership, the notarized signatures, the sealed approval stamps. "This," he muttered, glancing back at his partner. "This says Mr. Broadus owns this dealership." The crowd buzzed again, phones raised high, recording every second. The manager's face drained of color. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "That's fake. He forged it. Don't believe it." The older officer looked from the papers to Snoop, then to the wild-eyed manager. "Is that true?" he asked quietly. Snoop raised his chin. "You really think I need to fake something like that? Come on now." A murmur of laughter spread through the crowd. Even the staff members, who had once looked terrified, were now fighting smiles. The manager's panic deepened. His pride couldn't let go. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers out of the officer's hands. "Give me that. Those are lies. Lies." But before his hands could grab the folder, the older officer shoved him back. "Sir, that's enough." The command snapped like a whip across the dealership floor. The manager froze, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temples. The officer's next words cut him down even further. "From what I see here, you're the one trespassing. This man," he nodded at Snoop, "owns this dealership now. And if you don't leave immediately, you'll be the one in cuffs." The crowd gasped. Some even clapped. The staff members who had lived under the manager's thumb for years finally let out sighs of relief. But the manager wasn't done. His eyes flicked toward the crowd, then back at the officers. And suddenly, a dangerous smirk crept across his lips. "You're making a big mistake," he hissed. "You don't know who I know. You don't know the people I can call." He pulled a phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling as he dialed furiously. His eyes locked on Snoop, hatred burning behind them. "You think you've won," he sneered. "Just wait. You won't be standing here much longer." The room went quiet again, tension crackling in the air. Everyone leaned forward, wondering who he was calling, what power he still had left. And then the words left his lips, sharp and chilling. "Get down here now. Bring everyone. We're taking this place back." The line clicked. The phone went dark. The dealership floor froze in silence. No one moved. No one spoke. But everyone felt the same thing. Something far worse was coming. The dealership was still, like the air before a thunderstorm. Everyone stared at the manager, who stood with a wicked grin plastered across his sweaty face, his phone still clutched in a shaking hand. "You think this is over," he said, his voice low and sharp. "It's just beginning." Snoop didn't move. His calm was like armor, thicker than steel. He looked straight at the man, then at the officers who were still holding the ownership papers. "I told y'all already," Snoop said evenly. "Truth don't need backup. But lies? They always do." The crowd murmured in agreement. But despite the words, a wave of unease swept through the room. Nobody knew who the manager had called. Nobody knew how far he was willing to go. The lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Broadus, perhaps we should." Before he could finish, the sound of tires screeching outside cut him off. A black SUV whipped into the lot, followed by another, then another. Engines roared, doors slammed, and heavy footsteps thundered toward the entrance. The glass doors flew open. A group of men stormed in, big, broad-shouldered, wearing dark suits and sunglasses. They weren't regular customers, and they definitely weren't there to buy cars. Their movements were sharp, coordinated, almost military. The crowd gasped and pulled back. Some people ducked behind the cars on display. One of the officers instinctively reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we've got." "Put that down," one of the suited men barked, pointing a finger like a loaded gun. The officer froze. The manager's grin widened. He stepped toward his friends, raising his arms like a king returning to his throne. "Gentlemen," he said with false confidence, "you came just in time. This man," he jabbed a finger at Snoop, "is trying to steal what's mine. Get him out of here." The leader of the suited men, tall with a scar running down his cheek, tilted his head slowly toward Snoop. He studied him for a moment, then turned back to the manager. "You didn't tell us who he was." The manager's smile faltered. "What do you mean? He's nobody. Just some washed-up rapper who thinks he can." "Shut up." The words hit like a slap. The crowd gasped again. The manager blinked, stunned, not used to being silenced. The leader took a step closer to Snoop, then removed his sunglasses. His eyes locked onto Snoop's, and for the first time that night, tension shifted. "We know who you are," the man said, his voice steady. "And we don't touch people like you. Not here. Not anywhere." A ripple of shock spread through the crowd. The officers exchanged confused looks. The staff stared wide-eyed. Snoop raised a brow but didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The manager's face twisted in panic. "What are you doing? He's nothing. You work for me." But the leader shook his head. "No, we don't." And then, slowly, he turned his back on the manager. That small movement was louder than any shout. It told everyone in the room the balance of power had just shifted again. The manager's scream broke the silence. "No, this is MY dealership. You can't." But before he could finish, two of the suited men stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms. "Let me go," he shrieked, thrashing wildly. "I'll ruin you. All of you. Do you hear me?" The crowd was buzzing, recording every second with their phones. The staff looked like they were watching years of fear crumble in front of their eyes. Snoop finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Funny thing about hate," he said. "It always comes back around." The manager's eyes went wide as the men dragged him toward the door. But just before they could pull him out, he yanked free and turned back to Snoop. "This isn't over," he roared, spit flying. "You haven't seen the last of me." And then, with a furious shove, he knocked over a glass display case. The sound shattered across the dealership like a gunshot. People screamed. The officers stepped forward. The crowd scattered. And in the chaos, the manager bolted for the back exit. The glass door slammed shut behind him. Everyone froze. The manager was gone. The dealership was buzzing like a shaken beehive. The sound of the shattered glass still echoed in the room. Customers huddled together, whispering frantically. Employees looked at each other with wide, trembling eyes. The officers tried to calm the crowd, but no one was listening. All eyes were on Snoop. He stood firm in the center of the chaos, his tall frame steady, his gaze focused on the door where the manager had disappeared. He hadn't moved an inch, but everyone could feel the storm brewing behind his calm. The suited men looked uneasy. The leader clenched his jaw and turned to Snoop. "He's desperate now," the man said, "and desperate men are dangerous." Snoop finally shifted his eyes toward him. "So why'd you let him run?" The man hesitated. "Because some debts run deeper than jobs." That answer didn't satisfy anyone. Whispers spread like wildfire through the dealership. Who were these men really? And why were they protecting the very manager they seemed ready to throw out moments earlier? The lawyer stepped forward, papers still clutched tightly in his hand. His voice wavered, but he spoke with urgency. "Mr. Broaddus, we should leave. This situation, it's spiraling." Snoop shook his head. "Nah, I ain't running from my own place." He looked around at the faces staring at him. Some hopeful, some fearful, all waiting. If he think he can hide, let him. The truth gone find him. The crowd murmured again. Some even nodded. But before anyone could respond, a piercing sound cut through the air, an alarm blaring from the back of the building. Someone shouted, "The cars! He's in the garage!" People rushed toward the showroom windows. Outside, the massive garage doors at the back of the lot groaned open, and the roar of an engine thundered to life. Snoop stepped forward, his expression sharp. A black muscle car shot out of the garage, tires squealing, smoke curling behind it. Behind the wheel was the manager, his face twisted with rage and triumph. He swerved across the lot, nearly clipping a line of parked cars, and aimed straight for the dealership doors. The crowd inside screamed and ducked for cover. Glass shattered as the car slammed into the front of the building. The impact shook the ground. Displays toppled. Lights flickered. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The car skidded to a stop halfway inside the showroom, its headlights blazing like eyes in the smoke. For a moment, everything was frozen. The wreck, the dust, the shock. Then the manager climbed out, coughing, his suit torn, his hair wild. He looked more like a man possessed than a businessman now. His eyes darted across the room until they locked onto Snoop. "This place is mine," he screamed, his voice breaking. "You'll never take it from me." He reached into his jacket and pulled something out. The crowd gasped. It wasn't papers. It wasn't keys. It was a gun. Gasps turned into shrieks. Parents clutched their children. Employees ducked behind cars. The officers drew their weapons, shouting commands. But the manager didn't aim at them. He aimed at Snoop. The silence was thick. Time seemed to slow. The gun trembled in the manager's hand, but his eyes burned with hate. "You don't belong here," he spat. "Not you. Not ever." Snoop didn't flinch. His voice was low, steady, unshaken. "Then pull it." The crowd gasped again. No one expected those words. The manager's finger tightened on the trigger. The officers shouted again, but he didn't listen. His entire world had shrunk to one man, standing calm in the middle of the chaos. And then, a deafening bang echoed through the dealership. Everyone screamed. Smoke curled from the gun, but Snoop was still standing. The bullet had missed, and in the moment of stunned silence that followed, one of the suited men lunged forward, knocking the manager to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor. Officers swarmed in, pinning the screaming man as he kicked and fought like a trapped animal. The crowd erupted in noise, cheers, cries, disbelief. The chaos had broken open into something even bigger, and everyone knew this night was far from over, because the manager wasn't finished fighting. Not yet. The manager thrashed beneath the weight of the suited man and the officers, spitting curses that echoed through the broken glass and smoke-filled showroom. His face was red, veins bulging, as if hate itself had given him strength. "You don't understand," he screamed, his voice cracking. "This was supposed to be mine. Mine." The officers wrenched his arms behind his back, snapping cold steel cuffs onto his wrists. The crowd watched in stunned silence, the echo of the gunshots still vibrating in their ears. Parents shielded their children, employees whispered prayers, and customers clutched their phones like lifelines. Snoop hadn't moved. He stood tall, dust swirling around him, as if the chaos couldn't touch him. His eyes, however, were locked on the manager. Calm, steady, unflinching. The suited man who had tackled the manager straightened, brushing dust off his jacket. He turned to Snoop with a grave expression. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Snoop raised an eyebrow. "You mean him?" He jerked his chin toward the manager, now snarling like a caged animal. The man shook his head. "No. What's behind him?" The words hung heavy in the air. The lawyer, pale and trembling, looked from one to the other, clutching his briefcase as if it were armor. What do you mean by that?" The man didn't answer. Before anyone could press further, the manager let out a sharp, manic laugh. His teeth flashed in the dim showroom light, and though he was pinned, his voice cut through the room like a blade. "You fools," he spat. "You think this ends with me?" The crowd murmured nervously. Officers yanked him to his feet, but he twisted his neck toward Snoop, his eyes wild. "They'll come for you," he hissed. "You'll wish you never set foot in this place." "They?" Snoop finally spoke, his voice low, measured. "Who's they?" The manager smirked, blood dripping from a cut on his lip. "You'll find out. You've just declared war." The crowd gasped. The words carried a weight no one could ignore. War. It didn't sound like a rant. It sounded like a warning. The officers began dragging him toward the door, but he fought with every step, shouting, "This ain't over, Broadus. You hear me? This is just the beginning." The dealership was filled with unease. Every eye turned to Snoop. Customers who had once cheered now looked worried. Employees whispered in hushed tones. Even the children felt the shift in the air, clinging tighter to their parents. Snoop exhaled slowly. He walked forward, each step deliberate, until he was only a few feet from the restrained manager. He looked him dead in the eyes, voice calm but cutting. "I've been through worse than you. You ain't gonna scare me. Not today. Not tomorrow." The manager snarled, lunging forward, but the officers yanked him back hard. His laugh was bitter, broken, but filled with something dark. "We'll see," he spat, before being shoved out into the night. The dealership fell into silence once more. Only the sound of the broken alarm continued, shrill and relentless. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the crowd turned to Snoop. He was the only one standing tall in the wreckage, the only one who seemed unshaken. But inside, Snoop's mind was turning. The words, "They'll come for you," replayed over and over, like a warning that refused to fade. And as if to prove the manager's threat wasn't empty, headlights suddenly cut across the shattered windows from outside. Engines. Several of them. The crowd gasped, pressing closer to one another. The suited man stiffened. The lawyer dropped his briefcase in shock. Through the glass, dark silhouettes appeared. Several black SUVs pulling into the lot, their engines rumbling low, deliberate and menacing. The manager's words had come true faster than anyone expected. They had arrived. The engines rumbled outside like thunder rolling over the horizon. Every head in the shattered dealership turned toward the glow of headlights pouring through the broken windows. The crowd hushed, breath shallow, as the first SUV door swung open with a heavy, deliberate creak. From the dark vehicle stepped men in sharp black suits. Their movements were slow, confident, too rehearsed to be anything but dangerous. They weren't cops. They weren't customers. They weren't random strangers. These were men who carried power like a weapon, and they weren't here by accident. "Stay back," the suited man beside Snoop said firmly, extending an arm as if to shield him. His tone was sharper now, no longer calm. "This is what I was talking about." The lawyer's voice trembled. Who are they?" The suited man's eyes narrowed. "The people behind your little manager friend." The crowd gasped again. Mothers clutched their kids. Workers shrank behind counters, and customers shifted nervously toward the back exit. But it was too late. The SUVs had blocked every way out. 5 men in suits stepped into the shattered entrance, shoes crunching glass. Their eyes swept the room coldly before locking on Snoop. One of them, taller than the rest, with a scar slashing across his cheek, gave a thin, sinister smile. "So," the scarred man said, his voice smooth like poison, "this is the new owner." The words dripped with mockery. Snoop didn't flinch. He didn't move an inch. He just stared back, calm as stone. "Yeah," he said simply. The scarred man chuckled, a dark sound that filled the room. "You really thought you could walk in here, take over, and embarrass our guy in front of the world?" His eyes gleamed dangerously. That was a mistake. The manager, still cuffed outside but being shoved into a police cruiser, began to cackle wildly. His laugh carried through the broken walls, feeding the tension. I told you they'd come." The officers tried to shut the car door, but his laughter kept spilling into the dealership like gasoline feeding a fire. The scarred man took another step forward. "You've got 2 choices, Broadus. Walk away quietly, or be carried out." The room froze. The crowd trembled, some whispering prayers, some gripping each other's hands. The employees who had cheered Snoop just moments ago now looked pale with fear. Snoop finally moved. Slowly, deliberately. He pulled his sunglasses from his pocket and slid them onto his face. He straightened his jacket, tilted his head, and smirked. "I ain't never been good at walking away." The crowd gasped. The scarred man's smile faded into a scowl. His men shifted, hands brushing under their jackets, where everyone knew weapons waited. The air grew thick, heavy, dangerous. The suited man beside Snoop leaned in. "You just declared war, my friend." Snoop didn't look away from the scarred man. "Nah," he said coolly. "War declared itself when they disrespected me the moment I walked in here." The scarred man snarled. His hand twitched toward his coat, and suddenly the lawyer, shaking, pale, sweating, snapped. His voice cracked as he screamed, "Don't, please. There are kids here." For a moment, the tension hung unbearable. The scarred man froze, his eyes flicking over the crowd. The mothers, the children, the terrified customers huddled in corners. His lips curled into something cruel. And then he gave a sharp whistle. The men in suits spread out, locking every door, every window. "You've got until midnight, Broadus," the scarred man said coldly. "Sell us back the dealership, or we'll burn everything you care about to the ground." Gasps filled the room. Fear shot through the crowd like electricity. Midnight. The threat wasn't vague. It was clear, sharp, and deadly. Snoop finally stepped forward, closing the distance between him and the scarred man until they stood face to face. His voice was low. but it carried through the silence like a drumbeat. I don't sell. I don't fold. And I don't scare. The scarred man's eyes burned with hate, but he didn't move. Instead, he smirked again, as if Snoop's defiance was exactly what he'd expected. Then we'll see you at midnight, he said softly. He turned on his heel, snapping his fingers. His men followed, exiting with the same cold precision they'd entered with. Engines roared as the SUVs pulled away, leaving behind nothing but dread in the broken dealership. The crowd erupted, shouts, cries, questions filling the air. But Snoop just stood still, his jaw set, his fists clenched. Midnight was only hours away, and everyone knew one thing. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning.